Hello there, and welcome. You've made it to the right place. A place where history moves slowly, very, very slowly. Tonight, or today if you're resting at an odd hour, we'll begin a quiet, meandering journey through something simple, something so ordinary, you probably haven't thought twice about it in years. You might be resting near one right now. Perhaps your phone is resting on it. A cup of tea, maybe. Or nothing at all. Yes, we're going to talk about the table. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Not an exciting table, not a magical one, just a regular old table. From ancient stone blocks, to ornate Renaissance furniture, to those clunky, metal-legged office desks, we'll explore the evolution of this silent, dependable surface. So take a breath. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw relax. You don't need to pay attention too closely. You don't need to learn anything. There's no quiz. Only the calm, steady rhythm of one long, sleepy story. Let us begin with the very, very beginning. Before there were tables, long before anything that resembled furniture existed, humans lived close to the ground. They sat on dirt floors, on patches of animal hide, on rocks warmed by the sun. Food was shared communally, placed on leaves or flat stones, or simply eaten straight from the hand. The idea of lifting things from the ground wasn't yet necessary, but eventually, something changed. Maybe it was convenience. Maybe it was comfort. Maybe someone simply grew tired of sand in their soup. At some point, perhaps tens of thousands of years ago, a person, tired from the hunt, rested a bone or tool on a conveniently flat stone. And maybe, just maybe, someone else walked by, nodded, and thought, that looks useful. And so began the long, quiet tale of the table. The first proto-tables. Archaeologists can't point to the very first table. There's no single stone slab, with an ancient sticky note that reads, "First table, do not touch." But we do have evidence of proto-furniture. In Neolithic settlements, like those found at Skara Brae in Scotland, dating back to around 3100 BCE, stone platforms were arranged inside small, tidy homes. These weren't random rocks. They were purposefully placed. They had structure, flat surfaces, stable bases. Some were likely beds. Some were storage shelves. And some, perhaps some, were tables. Not for feasts, not for writing, but maybe for preparing food, or arranging tools, or simply to lift something a little higher from the floor. In those early, cold, windy dwellings, surrounded by stone and sea, a humble raised slab may have felt revolutionary. Tables in ancient Egypt. Fast forward a couple thousand years, and we arrive at the banks of the Nile, ancient Egypt, a civilization of gold, stone, papyrus, and slowly evolving furniture. Unlike the communal, ground-level traditions of early humans, the Egyptians of the Old Kingdom, around 2700 BCE, had begun to develop what we might now recognize as homes. And inside these homes were things with legs. Tables in ancient Egypt were small, functional, and used primarily by the elite. The poor didn't need tables. They had the floor. They had mats. They had shared meals under open skies. But in palaces and wealthy households, tables were made of wood, sometimes inlaid with ivory or gold. and carved into simple, clean shapes. Some were used to hold bowls. Others were used as writing surfaces. And some may have simply been decorative, an early form of status furniture. Imagine a noble scribe, sitting by an open window, writing on a piece of papyrus. His pen is a reed. His ink is made from soot and water. And beneath his scroll, a low, square wooden table, sturdy and still. Tables in Mesopotamia. To the east, between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, another great civilization rose. Mesopotamia, land of clay tablets, cuneiform, and the slow, steady thump of invention. Here, too, people began raising objects off the floor. In Sumerian homes, evidence suggests small stands and supports that may have served as early tables. We don't know exactly how they were used. We don't know if people sat at them, or beside them, or simply used them to hold oil lamps and jugs. But we do know this. Humans were beginning to value surfaces. Not just floors, not just walls, but places in between. Tables in ancient China. Let us now drift eastward, toward the lands of ancient China. By the time of the Zhou dynasty, roughly around 1000 BCE, tables were becoming more refined. The Chinese word for table, zhuo, emerged in texts and teachings. Furniture was elevated, both physically and culturally. Tables were no longer just tools. They were extensions of thought, spaces for art, calligraphy, tea, and conversation. But here's something curious. In traditional Chinese culture, people sat on mats or cushions, so tables were low, gracefully shaped, almost like companions to the body, rather than obstacles in front of it. A scholar might sit cross-legged for hours, his brush moving slowly across a scroll, while incense curled upward nearby. The table beneath him would be polished wood, possibly elm or rosewood, with rounded edges, and no nails or glue. Only joinery, only balance, only peace. Tables in ancient Greece and Rome. And now, to the west, to the white columns of Greece, and the crumbling stones of Rome. In Greece, tables were often small and portable. Called trapeza, these tables could be moved out of the way after meals. A practical decision. In homes that often had multipurpose rooms, they were made of wood or metal, sometimes marble. Some had 3 legs instead of 4. Why? Well, perhaps because 3 legs are more stable on uneven floors. In Rome, the table evolved further. There were specific names for different kinds of tables. The mensa, used for dining, the abacus, used for counting or writing, and the cartibulum, used as a display surface in atriums. Wealthy Romans had feasts where they reclined on couches, leaning sideways, while servants brought trays of food. Tables, in these banquets, were almost afterthoughts. Small stands for platters, things to reach toward, rather than sit around. Yet still, they were present, silent, essential. And so, we've wandered gently, from stone slabs in wind-swept huts, to polished wood in the hands of poets, to marble surfaces in echoing Roman villas. The table, unchanging in purpose, but always changing in form, from place to place, from one slow century to the next. Tables in the Middle Ages and castles of quiet dust. In this part, we'll float through the Middle Ages, a time of kings and castles and wooden things. Not the loud parts, not the dramatic parts, just the furniture. And one piece in particular, the table. So settle in, adjust your blanket, and if your eyes get heavy, don't fight it. The tables will still be here. Tables in early medieval homes. Let us begin in the quiet countryside of Europe. After the fall of the Roman Empire, life became simpler, and sometimes harder. Homes were smaller, built of timber, wattle, and thatch. The hearth was the center of it all. Smoke drifted up, sometimes escaping through a hole in the roof, sometimes not. Tables, in these early medieval homes, were not fancy, not carved, not polished, but they were useful. They were made from wide planks of oak or ash. Heavy, rough, sometimes uneven, but they served their purpose. A surface to chop vegetables, knead dough, or share a quiet meal of bread, cheese, and something warm from the pot. They weren't personal items. They weren't ornamental. They were just there, waiting, silent, sturdy. The great halls and the high table. As centuries passed, some people grew richer. Castles were built, stone by stone, wall by wall, and inside those castles, there were tables of a different kind. Picture a great hall, a long, echoing space, cold stone floors, tapestries fluttering slightly from a winter draft, and in the center, a long wooden table, very long, sometimes over 30 feet. This was the feast table, used by lords and knights and guests, used for meat, wine, bread, and more wine. But there was one table, raised slightly higher than the rest. It was called the high table, where the lord of the manor sat, with his closest companions. It wasn't just for eating. It was for watching, overseeing, commanding. The rest of the hall would be filled with benches, noisy people, maybe a bard with a lute, or a jester making odd faces. But at the high table, things were quiet, slow, intentional. You had to be important. To sit there, you had to be seen. Tables that fold and travel. Interestingly, many medieval tables were not permanent. They were built to be moved. The most common type was called a trestle table, a flat wooden plank, placed on top of two supports, called trestles. When the meal was done, the table was taken apart, planks stacked, trestles set aside. Why? Because space was precious. Rooms were shared, used for eating, sleeping, crafting, storytelling, and more. A table that could disappear was a clever thing, a helpful thing, and so it became normal for large households to assemble their tables for meals and disassemble them when done. A practical ritual, done daily, quietly, without fuss. Monasteries and scriptoriums. Meanwhile, not far from the castles, in places even quieter, were the monasteries. Here, monks copied manuscripts by hand, page after page, letter by letter, often for years. And what did they use? Yes, a table, but not like the feast table. These were small, simple, built at a gentle slant, to support a sheet of vellum or parchment. They were called scriptorium desks, just a slab of wood, angled toward the scribe, with maybe a candle holder, maybe a place for ink. There was no music, no meat, no wine, just the scratch of a quill, and the steady breathing of others. A room full of quiet, and one table, for each soul. Peasant tables and everyday life. In the villages beyond the castle gates, life was humble. Most people lived in one-room homes, shared by family, animals, and the weather. Here, the table was everything. It was the kitchen counter. It was the dining room. It was the workplace, and maybe a place to rest your head. At the end of a long day, made from whatever wood was available. Rough-hewn, knotted, but dependable. The table wasn't something to notice. It was just there, like the floor, like the roof, like breath. Tables for games and gambling. As time went on, people began to play, and some tables, were made for games. In taverns and inns, you might find a round table, where cards were dealt, or dice were thrown. The surfaces might be stained with ale, or carved with initials. But they were loved, in a rowdy, uneven kind of way. Not grand, not sacred, but essential, for passing the time. We've wandered through homes of mud and timber. We've stepped into castles lit by firelight. We've visited the quiet corners of monasteries and the noisy warmth of village inns. The table always present, always changing, always still. The Renaissance, when tables became beautiful. In this part, we enter the age of elegance, of lace and lute music, and candlelight flickering against gold-leafed furniture. The Renaissance, a time when art flourished, and tables finally got a little fancy. Let's begin, as always, slowly, the shift toward style. Until now, tables had been mostly practical. Slabs, planks, simple support for simpler needs. But in the 15th century, something changed. In Italy, wealthy patrons of the arts began to view the home itself as a canvas. Walls were painted, ceilings adorned, chairs carved, and the humble table? It too was transformed. Suddenly, furniture was not just function, but expression. Tables became symbols of taste, of education, of refinement. A table might have fluted legs, or clawed feet, or mythological scenes etched along its sides. It might be inlaid with marble, or mother of pearl, or tiny pieces of colored wood. In a method called intarsia, these tables were not meant to be hidden. They were meant to be seen. Italian Renaissance tables. Let us picture a home in Florence. The year is perhaps 1480. Sunlight streams through narrow windows, falling across a long, rectangular table. It stands proud, on two ornately carved legs, connected by a crossbar. This is a refectory table, a style that became popular in noble homes and monasteries alike. Its long plank top offers room for many guests, or many books, or both. A table like this was sturdy, yes, but also decorative. Its supports might look like lions, or twisted vines, or acanthus leaves curling in stone. Sitting at such a table wasn't just about eating. It was about presence, about being seen, about living, not just surviving. France and the age of carving. Now we float gently northward, into the grand homes of France. By the 16th century, French furniture had become even more elaborate. Tables were decorated with scrollwork, floral patterns, and heavy carvings that told stories. Some tables had drawers. Others had hidden compartments. One might find gilding on the edges. Real gold leaf, pressed delicately, by hand. Imagine a side table, called a console, pressed against a wall. It's not for working, not for dining. It's just there, to hold a vase of flowers, to reflect candlelight, to make the hallway feel important. That was its job, to exist beautifully. England, oak and utility. Meanwhile, in England, tables were still evolving, but in a more practical, grounded way. The favored wood was oak. Heavy, dark, strong. Joinery became an art form. Notches, mortises, tenons, all fitted tightly, without nails. One popular style was the gate-leg table. It had leaves on either side. That could be folded down, or raised when needed. It was clever, compact, perfect for tea, writing, or a quiet chat by the fire. It could tuck away when guests were gone, or open up when company arrived. A kind of friendly table, modest, reliable, tables for women and writing. Something else was changing too. More people were reading and writing, and tables began to adapt. Small, dainty desks appeared, called ladies' writing tables. These weren't like the long refectory tables. They were delicate, curved, often with tiny drawers, or secret compartments. Some were used for correspondence, others for embroidery, or simply for the ritual of sitting quietly at one's own space, a place to think, or pretend to arrange a letter just so, to dip a pen in ink, to be alone. For a moment, dining becomes theater. And then, there were the dining rooms, formal, symmetrical, structured, no longer a space of simple feasting. Now a performance. Long tables were set with pewter, then silver, then porcelain. Candles stood tall. Cloth flowed in folds and ruffles. Napkins were folded into birds, or boats, or bouquets. Dinner was now an event, and the table, the stage, a place for politics, for matchmaking, for performance, not just a place to eat. Tables in still life paintings. Here's something soft to imagine. In quiet studios across Europe, painters arranged tables, not to use them, but to capture them. In still life paintings, a table might hold a peeled lemon, a half-full glass of wine, a dusty skull, a crumpled napkin, a flower just beginning to wilt. These were not loud paintings. They didn't scream for attention, but they whispered of beauty, of time, of texture, of silence. The table was not the subject, but it was the foundation, always there, always still. And so, we've drifted through the Renaissance, a time when tables grew legs with personality, tops with stories, edges with elegance. They were more than surfaces. They were expressions, artworks, symbols of thought, and of self. The Enlightenment desks, discoveries, and drawing rooms. We're now stepping softly into a new age. The 18th century. The age of enlightenment. A time of letters, light, and long pauses between thoughts. This part of our journey isn't about grand banquet tables or the loud clink of goblets. This part is about smaller tables, personal ones, made for writing, for thinking, for wondering. Let's begin with a desk. The rise of the writing desk. By the 1700s, people were writing more than ever. Not just monks in monasteries, but philosophers, scientists, poets, and ordinary people, with ideas to record. And so, the writing desk was born, often made of mahogany, with slender legs and small drawers. The writing desk was more than furniture. It was a partner, a silent companion. To the mind, some had pigeonholes, little square shelves, for paper, wax, and letters. Some had hidden compartments, and clever fold-out flaps that clicked quietly into place. A man might sit down, with a candle, a penknife, and a thought he hadn't yet spoken aloud. And the desk? It would simply wait, and hold it, philosophers at their tables. Now imagine Jean-Jacques Rousseau, writing about freedom, or Voltaire, scribbling sharp words against superstition, each with their desk, a slab of wood, a single drawer, and pages piled beside, a cooling cup of tea. These desks weren't loud or decorated. They were orderly, like thoughts, lined up in neat rows. And as the candle burned lower, and the sky turned gray, the philosopher leaned forward, lost in thought, hands ink-stained, eyelids heavy. That's the kind of table we're talking about. Not for food, not for display, but for ideas. And quiet, the drawing room table. While men debated in studies, another table found its place. In the heart of the home, the drawing room table. This table was social. It lived in a room where guests would gather after dinner to sip tea, to play cards, to gossip gently about the neighbors. Drawing rooms, named for the idea of withdrawing from the formal dining space, were warm with lamplight and soft footsteps. The tables here were round, inviting, often with turned legs, and velvet chairs gathered around them. On top, perhaps a deck of cards, or an embroidery hoop, or a crystal decanter that caught the candlelight. Just so, tables for instruments and inventions. In the homes of inventors, tables served different purposes. A table might hold tiny brass gears, a dismantled clock, or early batteries, wrapped in cloth and copper. This was the century of Benjamin Franklin, of telescopes, of magnets, and microscopes. The surface of the table was now a stage for discovery, sparks, tinkering, scribbles in the margins, of diagrams no one else yet understood. Tables became workbenches, not for wood, but for thought, and though they creaked under the weight of glass and brass, they stood quietly, letting the future take shape. Portable tables and tea time. Meanwhile, in quieter corners, something small and delightful was happening. People began to move their tables. Yes, furniture became portable. A lady might carry a small tea table into the garden or beside the hearth, just large enough for a tray, a teacup, and a folded napkin. These tables had delicate legs and tops shaped like flowers, or octagons, or scalloped circles. They weren't meant for permanence. They were meant for the moment. A pause in the afternoon, a breath between duties. Tables as status symbols. Of course, in some homes, tables were still meant to impress. In palaces and salons, you'd find tables that shimmered with inlaid ivory, or polished marble, or gold leaf edges that caught the light like whispers. Some were meant for chess, some were meant for conversation, some for nothing at all, just to be looked at, admired, admired again. The table was no longer just a utility. It was an object of taste, a message, a mirror of its owner's refinement, even if it was never touched. The gentleman's desk. Now let's return to something smaller and quieter. The gentleman's desk, also called a bureau. It was compact, folded, elegant. It opened like a secret, a lid that dropped forward, revealing compartments inside, each one just the right size, for coins, stamps, or half-written verses about clouds, or love, or perhaps tables. It was a private place, in a public room, a quiet corner, to tuck away your thoughts, and shut them again, with a soft click, at the edge of a new era. And now, we find ourselves near the edge of something new. The 19th century waits, with factories, steam, cities, and office desks. Tables will change again. They'll lose some of their lace, some of their curve. They'll become rectangles and steel. The modern age, work, wires, and the return to simplicity. You've made it, all the way to the present. Or perhaps, you drifted in and out along the way. No matter. History is forgiving. It doesn't mind being slept through. Now, we find ourselves in the world of electricity, of screens, of swivel chairs, and coffee mugs that say things like, "World's okayest employee." But even in this buzzing, blinking era, the table remains. Changed, yes, but still there. still holding things up, still waiting patiently. Let's take one last slow walk together through the tables of the modern world. The industrial table. In the 19th century, the world began to move faster. Steam engines, factories, cities full of people, with places to go and things to write down. Tables adapted. They became desks, but not just for poets or philosophers anymore. Now they belong to clerks, to typists, to office workers. These tables were built for speed and repetition. No carvings, no curves, just drawers, inkwells, a blotter, a bell. Imagine a long row of desks in a quiet, echoing room, each with a person sitting straight-backed, pen scratching across forms. Hour after hour, no one speaks. The room hums, with the sound of paper moving, and beneath it all, the quiet creak of a tired wooden desk, doing its job, the school desk. At the same time, another kind of table took its place in the world. The school desk, simple, compact, often attached to a chair, a little cubby beneath for books, and maybe a note folded 3 times, from one student to another. These desks were made of metal and wood, lined in rows, in rooms that smelled like chalk and possibility. Generations of children carved their initials into the corners. Some doodled, some dreamed, some stared out the window as the teacher's voice drifted, like warm air on a spring afternoon. The desk never minded. It was there to catch mistakes, to hold a lunchbox, to wait through math class, and daydreams alike. The office desk of the 20th century. Now let's move forward to the 20th century, the age of paperwork, of telephones, of buzzing fluorescent lights. The office desk became a fixture. Boxy, efficient, made of particle board or metal. On top you'd find a typewriter, a cup of pencils, and maybe a tiny plant struggling for light. Desks now lived in cubicles, little gray boxes, stacked like drawers in a filing cabinet. People sat in them, like puzzle pieces in an enormous machine. But even here, among forms and folders, coffee rings and staplers, the desk remained steady, holding up the small, ordinary parts of a modern life. The computer arrives, and then the computer. At first, it was huge, heavy, noisy. Desks had to change. They sprouted trays for keyboards. Cables slithered like vines beneath the surface. Monitors glowed. Mice clicked. And suddenly, the table wasn't just for writing. It was for connecting. Email, spreadsheets, 1,000 open tabs. The desk became a little command center, a spaceship console, a portal to anywhere. And yet, it still had that same old job, holding things up, supporting ideas, staying still. Quietly, the rise of the home office. Then came a subtle shift. Work followed us home. People built offices in spare rooms, or closets, or kitchen corners. Desks became smaller again. Minimalist, foldable, mobile. Some were made of glass, others of reclaimed wood. A laptop replaced a tower, a wireless mouse, a single notebook. Now the desk didn't need to impress. It just needed to fit into our homes, our lives, our rhythm. And in the silence of a home office, you might hear nothing at all, just the soft tap of keys and the sound of your own breath, the standing desk and the yoga ball. In recent years, tables have even risen. Quite literally, the standing desk arrived, followed by desks with motors, desks that move, desks that remind you to stretch, to hydrate, to breathe. People sit on yoga balls, or kneel, or wobble gently. As they work, the table has become a partner. In health, not just work. It's not about grandeur anymore. It's about balance, efficiency, care. But deep down, it's still a table, still that old friend, waiting, holding, supporting. The dining table returns. And amid all the screens, something soft is happening again. People are returning to the dining table, not just to eat, but to gather, to play board games, to do puzzles, to bake bread, and sit for hours. Even after the plates are cleared, the table becomes a place to unplug, to breathe, to laugh, to look across at someone you love, and say, "This was a good day," even if all you did was sit at the same table and sip something warm. The full circle. And now, we've reached the end. From carved stone slabs, in forgotten caves, to glass-topped desks, beside smart speakers, the table has never stopped being there, through revolutions, through meals, through letters, and drawings, and taxes, and tears. It's always stayed steady, quiet, reliable, still. So tonight, as you rest your head, maybe beside a desk, or a nightstand, or a table just big enough for a lamp and a book, remember, the table is still there, and it's not going anywhere, not for another 1,000 years. Sleep well. The history of the table is complete, and so is this moment. Until next time.